Hello, and welcome to the Drowsy Professor. I'm so glad you're here tonight, ready to journey back through time to explore one of nature's most profound and gentle stories. How ancient predators helped shape the beautiful complexity of the natural world we know today. As you settle in, let me know where in the world and at what time you're watching. Now, get comfortable, adjust your pillows, pull up your blankets, and take a slow, deep breath. Tonight, we'll discover how the earliest hunters and their prey worked together across millions of years to create the magnificent diversity of life on Earth. Take another breath and let's begin. Imagine, if you will, floating gently through the warm, crystal-clear waters of an ancient sea, suspended in time over 500 million years ago, during what scientists call the Ediacaran period. The water around you is perfectly clear, warmed by a sun that shines through an atmosphere slightly different from the one you know today. These primordial oceans stretch endlessly in every direction, their depths holding secrets that are about to unfold in the most gentle and beautiful way imaginable. As you drift through these ancient waters, the first thing you notice is the profound peace that characterizes this underwater world. The seafloor below spreads out like an underwater meadow, covered with soft, carpet-like bacterial mats that ripple gently in the subtle currents. These mats create a living tapestry of colors, deep greens and purples, rust-colored oranges and golden yellows, each shade representing different communities of microorganisms that have been perfecting their craft for billions of years. Scattered across this bacterial landscape are some of the most extraordinary creatures that have ever lived on Earth. These are the Ediacaran organisms, Earth's first large, complex life forms, and they exist in a world that knows nothing of the hunt, nothing of predation, nothing of the biological arms race that will soon transform the nature of life itself. They are gentle beings, soft-bodied and peaceful, living in harmony with their environment and with each other in ways that seem almost dreamlike in their simplicity. Some of these ancient creatures look like enormous leaves or fronds, swaying gently in the current as they filter nutrients from the water around them. Others resemble quilted discs or jellyfish, their soft bodies rising and falling with the rhythm of the tides. Still others take the form of segmented tubes or branching structures that remind you of underwater trees or coral formations, though they are unlike anything that exists in the modern world. These Ediacaran organisms represent life's first experiment with large size and complex structure, but they have achieved this complexity through entirely peaceful means. They feed by absorbing nutrients directly from the water around them, or by hosting symbiotic bacteria within their tissues, or by filtering organic particles from the gentle currents. There is no aggression here, no competition in any violent sense, no struggle for survival that involves one organism harming another. The water itself tells the story of this peaceful world. It moves with languid grace, carrying dissolved nutrients in complex patterns that spiral and eddy around the soft bodies of the ancient creatures. The temperature is perfectly warm and stable, maintained by greenhouse gases in the ancient atmosphere that create a worldwide climate more uniform and gentle than anything Earth has experienced since. There are no sudden temperature changes, no harsh currents, no environmental stresses that might drive organisms toward more aggressive survival strategies. As you observe this ancient paradise, you begin to notice something remarkable about the relationship between these creatures and their environment. Every organism seems to have found its own perfect niche, its own way of making a living that doesn't interfere with or threaten any of its neighbors. The large frond-like creatures occupy the areas with the strongest currents, where they can most efficiently filter nutrients from the flowing water. The disc-shaped organisms settle in quieter areas where they can photosynthesize or cultivate their symbiotic bacteria without disturbance. The segmented creatures create complex, three-dimensional structures that provide habitat for smaller organisms without competing with them for resources. Everything is arranged in layers and patterns that maximize efficiency while minimizing conflict. It's as if the entire ecosystem has been designed by a master architect who understood how to create beauty and function without waste or strife. The silence of this underwater world is profound and peaceful. There are no sounds of struggle or conflict, no calls of alarm or signals of distress. Instead, there is only the gentle whisper of water moving past soft bodies, the subtle chemical communications between organisms, and the quiet background hum of countless metabolic processes working in perfect harmony. The light that filters down through the clear water creates an ever-changing pattern of brightness and shadow that dances across the seafloor and illuminates the soft bodies of the ancient creatures with an almost ethereal glow. During the day, photosynthetic organisms capture this light and convert it into energy that supports the entire community. At night, bioluminescent bacteria create their own gentle illumination, painting the dark water with subtle patterns of blue and green light. This is a world without fear, a world where survival is achieved through cooperation and efficiency rather than competition and aggression. The organisms here have had millions of years to perfect their peaceful ways of life, and they have created an ecosystem that is both stable and productive without any of the dramatic interactions that will later characterize life on Earth. But even as you observe this perfect peace, you can sense that change is coming. Deep within the genetic codes of these gentle creatures, evolution is quietly working on innovations that will eventually transform this tranquil world into something far more dynamic and complex. The changes are so subtle that no individual organism will ever notice them. But over millions of years, they will accumulate into transformations that will reshape the very nature of life itself. The first hints of these coming changes appear in the behavior of some of the smaller organisms that live among the bacterial mats. These tiny creatures, no larger than your fingernail, begin to show signs of more active movement patterns. Instead of simply drifting with the currents or remaining anchored in one spot, they start to exhibit purposeful motion, actively seeking out areas where nutrients are more concentrated or conditions are more favorable. This enhanced mobility is subtle at first, involving nothing more than slightly more efficient swimming motions or better coordination between different parts of an organism's body. But it represents the beginning of something revolutionary, the development of active hunting behavior that will eventually give rise to the first true predators in Earth's history. The creatures that develop these enhanced movement capabilities don't immediately become hunters in any recognizable sense. Instead, they simply become more efficient at finding and exploiting food sources. They develop better chemoreception abilities that allow them to detect the chemical signatures of nutrients from greater distances. They evolve more sophisticated nervous systems that can process this chemical information and direct their movements accordingly. As these capabilities develop over millions of years, some lineages begin to discover that certain other organisms represent particularly rich sources of nutrients. A creature that can locate and consume bacterial mats gets more nutrition than one that relies on the sparse nutrients dissolved in the water. An organism that can digest the soft tissues of other creatures has access to concentrated packages of proteins and lipids that are far more nutritious than any other food source available. The transition from passive feeding to active predation happens so gradually that it's almost imperceptible. At first, the more mobile organisms simply consume organisms that have already died or become weakened by other factors. They become nature's first scavengers, cleaning up the seafloor and recycling nutrients that would otherwise be lost to decomposition. From scavenging, it's a small step to what might be called opportunistic predation, taking advantage of organisms that are vulnerable due to injury, disease, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. These early predatory interactions are remarkably gentle by modern standards. The predators are small and relatively weak, and their prey often shows little evidence of stress or struggle. The first true predators to emerge in Earth's oceans are tiny, almost microscopic creatures that hunt even smaller prey in the spaces between sand grains and among the filaments of bacterial mats. Their hunting techniques are simple but effective. They follow chemical trails left by their prey, use simple sensory organs to locate potential victims, and employ basic capture mechanisms to secure their meals. These early predatory interactions have profound effects on both hunters and hunted, though the changes unfold so slowly that they might not be apparent to any individual observer. The predators develop better sensory systems to locate their prey, more efficient locomotion to pursue them, and improved feeding mechanisms to capture and digest them. The prey, in turn, begin to develop subtle defensive adaptations, slightly better mobility, enhanced sensory awareness, or primitive warning systems that alert them to approaching danger. The arms race between predators and prey that begins during this period is conducted at a pace that is almost geological in its slowness. Improvements in hunting ability are matched by improvements in escapability over timescales of millions of years. Each adaptation drives counter-adaptations that drive further adaptations in an endless cycle of innovation and refinement. The water chemistry of the ancient seas begins to change subtly as predatory behavior becomes more common. The increased activity of mobile organisms stirs up sediments and enhances mixing between different water layers. Nutrients are redistributed more efficiently throughout the water column as the waste products of predators fertilize areas that were previously nutrient-poor. The seafloor communities become more complex and dynamic as predatory pressure creates new ecological niches and opportunities. Areas that were once uniform bacterial mats develop patchwork patterns as some sections are grazed while others remain untouched. This heterogeneity creates microhabitats that can support different types of organisms with different feeding strategies and environmental requirements. The evolution of predatory behavior also drives the development of more complex food webs and energy transfer systems. Instead of each organism feeding directly on primary producers or dissolved nutrients, energy begins to flow through multiple levels of consumers. This creates more efficient use of available resources and supports larger total biomass in the marine ecosystem. The sensory world of these ancient seas becomes richer and more complex as organisms develop enhanced abilities to detect and respond to their environment. The simple chemical gradients that once provided all the information necessary for survival are supplemented by more sophisticated sensory modalities. Some organisms develop primitive light-sensing organs. Others evolve enhanced mechanoreception that can detect water movements created by other organisms. Communication between organisms becomes more important as the risks and benefits of different behaviors become more significant. Early warning systems evolve that allow prey organisms to alert each other to the presence of predators. Predators develop their own signaling systems that help them coordinate hunting activities or avoid competing with each other for the same prey. The physical structure of organisms begins to change as predatory pressure selects for new body plans and defensive strategies. Some organisms develop thicker, more resistant outer coverings that make them harder to damage. Others evolve more streamlined shapes that allow for faster swimming or more efficient burrowing into protective sediments. Despite these changes, the overall character of life in the ancient seas remains remarkably peaceful and harmonious. The predators that emerge during this period are gentle by modern standards, and their hunting techniques involve more stealth and persistence than violence or aggression. The prey organisms develop defensive strategies that emphasize avoidance and concealment rather than active fighting or aggressive defense. The temperature and chemical stability of the ancient oceans helps moderate the intensity of predator-prey interactions and prevents them from becoming too extreme or destructive. The warm, nutrient-rich waters provide abundant resources that reduce the pressure for aggressive competition, while the stable environmental conditions allow for gradual, sustainable evolutionary changes rather than rapid, disruptive transformations. As you continue to observe this slowly evolving underwater world, you begin to appreciate the subtle beauty of these early predatory relationships. What is emerging is not a world of violence and conflict, but rather a world of increased complexity and sophistication where organisms develop more intricate ways of interacting with each other and with their environment. The gentle currents that flow through these ancient seas carry with them the chemical signatures of this evolutionary transformation. The waste products of the first predators, the alarm chemicals released by their prey, and the complex organic molecules that result from more efficient nutrient cycling. The water itself becomes a medium of communication and interaction that connects all organisms in an increasingly complex web of relationships. The light that filters down through the water reveals an underwater world that is becoming more dynamic and varied with each passing millennium. The simple, uniform communities of the early Ediacaran are giving way to more complex assemblages of organisms with different roles, different strategies, and different ways of making a living in the ancient seas. As you float in these transforming waters, surrounded by the gentle activities of Earth's first predators and their prey, you can sense that you are witnessing the beginning of one of the most important transitions in the history of life. The peaceful cooperation that has characterized life for billions of years is being supplemented by more complex forms of interaction that will eventually give rise to all the diversity and beauty of the modern natural world. The first hunters are small and simple, but they represent the beginning of a revolution that will transform life on Earth in ways that are both profound and beautiful. Their emergence marks the end of life's childhood and the beginning of its journey toward the incredible complexity and sophistication that characterizes the modern biosphere. As you continue floating through these ancient waters, time flows forward like a gentle river, carrying you deeper into the story of life's growing complexity. Millions of years pass in their stately progression, and you begin to witness one of the most elegant and beautiful chapters in the history of evolution, the development of what might be called the art of the chase. This is not the violent pursuit that the word chase might suggest to modern minds, but rather a gentle dance between hunter and hunted that unfolds with all the grace and beauty of a slowly choreographed ballet. The transformation begins subtly, with small improvements in the swimming abilities of the early predators you observed in the previous chapter. These tiny hunters, still no larger than your thumbnail, begin to develop more streamlined body shapes that allow them to move through the water with greater efficiency and speed. Their primitive nervous systems become more sophisticated, developing better coordination between sensory input and motor response that allows for more precise and purposeful movement through their three-dimensional aquatic environment. The water around these early swimmers begins to tell new stories as their enhanced mobility creates patterns of flow and turbulence that have never existed before in Earth's oceans. As these primitive predators move through the water, they create subtle pressure waves and chemical trails that spread outward in complex patterns, carrying information about their presence and activities to other organisms throughout the surrounding area. The prey organisms, in their turn, begin to develop their own enhanced mobility in response to the gentle pressure of predation. What emerges is not a frantic arms race of speed and violence, but rather a patient, evolutionary dialogue between different forms of life, each one inspiring innovations in the other through their peaceful interactions. The process unfolds over millions of years, giving every organism plenty of time to adapt and evolve appropriate responses to the changing conditions of their underwater world. The development of improved swimming abilities requires fundamental innovations in biological engineering that represents some of evolution's most elegant solutions to the challenges of movement through a fluid medium. Early swimmers develop more flexible body segments that can undulate in coordinated waves, propelling them through the water with motions that resemble the graceful movements of modern fish, but on a much smaller and simpler scale. Some lineages experiment with different approaches to aquatic locomotion, developing primitive fins or paddle-like appendages that can push against the water more efficiently than simple body undulations. Others evolve jet propulsion systems that work by forcing water through specialized chambers in their bodies, creating thrust in much the same way that modern squids and jellyfish propel themselves through the sea. The sensory systems of both predators and prey become increasingly sophisticated as the ability to detect and respond to movement becomes more important for survival. Simple light-sensitive spots evolve into more complex photoreceptive organs that can distinguish between different patterns of light and shadow. Basic chemoreceptors develop enhanced sensitivity that allows organisms to detect the faintest traces of chemical signals from other creatures. Perhaps most remarkably, some organisms begin to develop primitive mechanoreceptors, sensory organs that can detect the minute pressure waves and water movements created by other swimming creatures. These early lateral line systems, as they would later be called, allow their possessors to sense the approach of other organisms even in complete darkness or murky water, creating an entirely new dimension of awareness in the ancient seas. The hunting strategies that emerged during this period are remarkably sophisticated despite the small size and simple construction of the predators involved. Some hunters develop patient stalking behaviors, following their prey at a distance while waiting for the optimal moment to strike. Others become ambush predators, hiding among the bacterial mats or in the shadows of larger organisms until unsuspecting prey ventures within striking distance. The most successful early predators are those that develop the ability to anticipate the movements of their prey rather than simply reacting to them. This requires a level of neural complexity that represents a significant advance over the simple stimulus-response behaviors that characterized earlier life. These predators must be able to track moving targets, predict where they will be in the future, and coordinate their own movements to intercept them at just the right time and place. The prey organisms, for their part, develop increasingly sophisticated escape behaviors that transform simple swimming into an art form of evasion and misdirection. Some species evolve erratic swimming patterns that make their movements unpredictable and difficult to track. Others develop burst swimming capabilities that allow them to accelerate rapidly when threatened, creating sudden changes in speed and direction that can confuse pursuing predators. The environment itself becomes a participant in these early chases as prey organisms learn to use the three-dimensional structure of their habitat to their advantage. Rocky outcrops, bacterial mats, and other seafloor features become obstacles that can be used to break the line of sight between predator and prey or to create turbulence that masks chemical trails and pressure waves. Some prey species develop remarkable abilities to navigate through complex three-dimensional environments at high speed, threading their way between obstacles with precision that would challenge even the most skilled pilots. Others learn to use the texture and topography of the seafloor to their advantage, diving into protective crevices or burrowing rapidly into soft sediments when threatened. The chemical dimension of predator-prey interactions becomes increasingly complex as both hunters and hunted develop more sophisticated chemical communication and detection systems. Prey organisms begin to release alarm pheromones when threatened, warning other members of their species about the presence of predators in the area. These chemical warning systems create networks of communication that can span large areas of the seafloor and provide early warning of approaching danger. Predators, in turn, develop enhanced chemical sensitivity that allows them to track these alarm signals and use them to locate areas where prey are concentrated. Some predators even learn to follow the chemical trails left by prey organisms as they move through the water, creating pursuit behaviors that can continue for extended periods across considerable distances. The temporal aspects of predator-prey interactions become more complex as organisms develop better abilities to remember past experiences and learn from them. Prey that have survived previous encounters with predators develop enhanced wariness and improved escape responses. Predators that have been successful in particular hunting situations learn to recognize similar opportunities and develop preferences for specific types of prey or hunting locations. The daily and seasonal rhythms of the ancient seas begin to influence the timing of predatory activities as organisms learn to take advantage of periods when conditions are most favorable for their particular strategies. Some predators become more active during periods of low light when their movements are less likely to be detected. Others time their hunting activities to coincide with periods when prey are most vulnerable, such as during reproduction or when they are focused on feeding activities. The water temperature and chemistry of the ancient oceans create conditions that moderate the intensity of predator-prey interactions and prevent them from becoming too extreme. The warm, stable waters provide abundant energy for sustained swimming activities, while the rich chemical environment ensures that there are always alternative food sources available when hunting is unsuccessful. The currents and water movements in the ancient seas become highways and barriers that influence the patterns of predator-prey interactions. Predators learn to use currents to their advantage, positioning themselves downstream from areas where prey are likely to be carried by the flow. Prey organisms develop abilities to detect and avoid areas where currents might carry them into dangerous situations. The vertical structure of the water column becomes increasingly important as organisms develop the ability to move efficiently in 3 dimensions. Some predators specialize in hunting near the seafloor, where prey might be concentrated around food sources. Others learn to exploit the mid-water regions where different prey species may be more abundant or less wary. The development of complex hunting and escape behaviors drives improvements in the nervous systems of both predators and prey that represent some of the most significant advances in neural complexity since the evolution of the first nerve cells. Simple neural networks evolve into more sophisticated systems capable of processing multiple sensory inputs simultaneously and coordinating complex behavioral responses. Some organisms develop primitive memory systems that allow them to remember the locations of successful hunting or feeding areas and return to them repeatedly. Others evolve learning capabilities that allow them to modify their behaviors based on experience and improve their performance over time. The social aspects of predator-prey interactions begin to emerge as organisms discover the advantages of cooperation in both hunting and escape behaviors. Some predators learn to hunt in loose associations that increase their chances of success by overwhelming prey defenses or by driving prey into areas where other hunters are waiting. Prey organisms, in turn, develop schooling and flocking behaviors that provide protection through the simple strategy of safety in numbers. These early aggregations are not as tightly coordinated as modern schools of fish, but they represent the beginning of social behaviors that will eventually become some of the most spectacular displays in the natural world. The communication systems that develop to coordinate these early social behaviors involve complex combinations of chemical, visual, and mechanical signals. Group members learn to respond to the movements and signals of their neighbors, creating collective behaviors that are more sophisticated than anything any individual could accomplish alone. The energy economics of predator-prey interactions become increasingly important as more active lifestyles require greater energy expenditure. Successful predators must be able to capture enough prey to fuel their enhanced metabolic needs, while prey organisms must balance the energy costs of enhanced vigilance and escape behaviors against the benefits of avoiding predation. These energy considerations drive the evolution of more efficient metabolic systems and energy storage mechanisms that allow organisms to sustain periods of intense activity. Some species develop the ability to alternate between periods of high activity and rest, optimizing their energy use for maximum survival benefit. The reproductive strategies of both predators and prey begin to change in response to the new selective pressures created by predator-prey interactions. Some species develop enhanced reproductive rates that can compensate for losses due to predation. Others evolve improved parental care behaviors that increase the survival chances of their offspring in an increasingly dangerous world. The geographic distribution of different species begins to be influenced by predator-prey relationships as organisms develop preferences for habitats that provide optimal conditions for their particular strategies. Some areas become refugia where prey can find safety from predation, while others become hunting grounds where predators concentrate their activities. The seasonal migrations that begin during this period represent some of the first examples of large-scale animal movements in Earth's history. These migrations are driven by the search for optimal conditions for feeding, reproduction, or predator avoidance, and they create dynamic patterns of population distribution that change throughout the year. The optical properties of the ancient seas begin to be influenced by the increased activity of swimming organisms as their movements stir up sediments and create turbulence that affects water clarity. Some organisms learn to use these changes in visibility to their advantage, timing their activities to coincide with conditions that favor their particular hunting or escape strategies. The acoustic environment of the ancient oceans becomes more complex as the movements of swimming organisms create new types of sounds and vibrations that travel through the water. Some species develop primitive echolocation abilities that allow them to navigate and hunt using reflected sound waves, while others learn to remain silent to avoid detection. The chemical gradients that characterize different parts of the ancient seas become highways of information that organisms learn to read and interpret. Predators develop abilities to track chemical plumes upstream to their sources, while prey learn to avoid areas where chemical conditions indicate the presence of danger. As you observe these increasingly complex interactions unfolding over millions of years, you begin to appreciate the remarkable beauty and sophistication that emerges from the simple interaction between hunters and hunted. What started as basic predatory behavior has evolved into an intricate dance of movement and counter-movement, strategy and counter-strategy, that demonstrates the incredible creativity of evolution when faced with new challenges and opportunities. The water around you pulses with the activities of countless organisms engaged in this ancient choreography, each one contributing to the growing complexity and beauty of life in the ancient seas. The gentle pursuit of predator and prey creates patterns of movement and interaction that are like living art, painting the three-dimensional canvas of the ocean with brushstrokes of unprecedented elegance and grace. The warm currents that carry you through this underwater ballet speak of transformation and innovation, of life learning new ways to interact with itself that will eventually give rise to all the magnificent complexity of the modern natural world. In these ancient chases, you can see the seeds of every pursuit and escape, every hunt and evasion, every complex behavior that characterizes life on Earth today. The art of the chase that you are witnessing represents one of evolution's greatest masterpieces, a form of natural creativity that transforms simple interactions into sophisticated behaviors that rival the most complex human choreography in their beauty and precision. This is life learning to dance with itself, creating patterns of movement and meaning that will echo through hundreds of millions of years of subsequent evolution. As you continue your gentle journey through these ancient waters, carried forward by the currents of time itself, you begin to witness one of evolution's most beautiful and ingenious responses to the challenges of predation. The art of the chase that has been developing over millions of years has inspired something equally remarkable: the art of protection. What emerges in the ancient seas is not a world of violence and destruction, but rather a world where life discovers countless elegant ways to create safety and security through the patient craft of biological engineering. The first hints of this defensive revolution appear in the form of subtle changes to the outer surfaces of prey organisms. Where once these creatures possessed only soft, vulnerable tissues exposed directly to the surrounding water, they begin to develop slightly thicker, more resistant outer layers that provide modest protection against the gentle predatory pressures of their environment. These early protective coverings are remarkably simple, perhaps nothing more than a slight thickening of the existing cell walls or the secretion of a thin layer of protective mucus. Yet even these simple innovations represent profound breakthroughs in biological architecture. The organisms that develop these early defenses must solve complex engineering problems involving the balance between protection and mobility, between safety and the ability to feed and reproduce. Each protective adaptation must be carefully integrated with existing biological systems to ensure that the cure does not become worse than the disease. The chemical processes involved in creating these early protective structures are marvels of biological chemistry. Organisms begin to extract dissolved minerals from the seawater around them, calcium, silica, and various trace elements, and incorporate them into complex organic matrices that create materials stronger and more durable than anything life has produced before. These biocomposite materials combine the flexibility of organic polymers with the strength of inorganic minerals to create protective structures that are both tough and lightweight. The first shells to appear in the ancient seas are tiny, delicate structures that seem almost jewel-like in their perfection. These early shells are not the massive, fortress-like constructions that will characterize some later organisms, but rather elegant solutions to the problem of protection that achieve maximum defensive benefit with minimum material investment. They curve and spiral in mathematically precise patterns that distribute stress optimally and provide protection from multiple directions simultaneously. The creation of a shell represents one of the most complex engineering challenges that evolution has ever solved. The organism must first extract the raw materials from its environment, then transport them to the appropriate location, then organize them into precise three-dimensional structures that will provide effective protection without interfering with essential life functions. The process requires sophisticated cellular machinery and precise genetic control systems that represent significant advances in biological complexity. Some organisms solve the shell-building challenge by secreting their protective structures continuously throughout their lives, adding new layers and materials as they grow larger and their defensive needs increase. These shells become living records of their creators' life histories, with growth rings and chemical signatures that preserve information about the environmental conditions experienced during each phase of development. Other species develop shells that can be shed and rebuilt periodically, allowing them to escape from damaged protective structures and create new ones that are perfectly fitted to their current size and needs. This molting strategy requires even more sophisticated biological machinery, including systems for weakening and dissolving old shells while simultaneously preparing the materials for new construction. The shapes and structures that evolved during this early period of shell development demonstrate evolution's incredible creativity in solving defensive challenges. Some shells are smooth and streamlined to minimize drag during swimming, while others develop complex surface textures that make them difficult for predators to grip. Some shells are designed to be as lightweight as possible to minimize their impact on mobility, while others prioritize maximum protection even at the cost of reduced agility. Spiral shells emerge as one of the most successful defensive strategies, combining strength with efficient use of materials and designs that seem to anticipate mathematical principles that won't be formally discovered for hundreds of millions of years. These spiral constructions distribute stress along curved surfaces that can resist both crushing forces and penetrating attacks, while maintaining internal spaces for the soft tissues of their creators. The development of protective spines represents another elegant solution to the challenges of defense in the ancient seas. These sharp, projecting structures make their possessors difficult and dangerous to attack, while requiring relatively modest investments of materials and energy to construct. Early spines are simple, straight projections that extend outward from the body surface, but they quickly evolve into more complex forms with elaborate branching patterns and sophisticated anchoring systems. Some organisms develop spines that can move and rotate, creating active defensive systems that can be deployed when needed and retracted when not in use. Others evolve spines with specialized tips that may be poisonous or particularly sharp, creating chemical as well as physical deterrence to predation. The coordination required to control multiple moving spines represents a significant advance in neuromuscular complexity. The material science involved in spine construction becomes increasingly sophisticated as organisms experiment with different approaches to creating strong, sharp structures. Some spines are constructed from the same calcium carbonate materials used in shells, while others incorporate different minerals that provide enhanced hardness or flexibility. The interfaces between spines and the main body require particularly careful engineering to ensure that these defensive weapons don't become liabilities during normal activities. Flexible armor represents yet another approach to the protection challenge, involving the development of segmented or overlapping defensive structures that can bend and move without losing their protective effectiveness. These systems require sophisticated engineering to create joints and articulation points that maintain strength while allowing necessary movement for feeding, reproduction, and locomotion. The early development of flexible armor involves creating chains of small, hard plates that can slide past each other while maintaining overall protective coverage. The connections between these plates must be strong enough to resist predatory attacks, while flexible enough to allow the complex movements required for normal life activities. The result is a form of biological chainmail that provides excellent protection without completely sacrificing mobility. Some organisms develop armor systems with multiple layers, combining hard outer plates with softer, shock-absorbing materials underneath. These composite defensive systems can dissipate the energy of predatory attacks while preventing penetration of the protective barrier. The engineering principles involved in these layered defenses parallel concepts that won't appear in human technology for hundreds of millions of years. The sensory challenges associated with heavily armored lifestyles drive significant innovations in nervous system organization and sensory capability. Organisms that encase themselves in protective shells must develop new ways to monitor their environment and detect approaching threats. This leads to the evolution of sophisticated sensory systems that can function through small openings in protective structures, or that can be extended and retracted as needed. Some armored organisms develop periscope-like sensory organs that can be extended beyond their protective shells to gather information about the surrounding environment. Others evolve chemical sensing systems that can detect the presence of predators through water currents that flow into their shells. The coordination of these external sensory systems with the motor responses needed for protection and escape requires significant advances in neural processing capability. The feeding challenges associated with heavily armored lifestyles lead to remarkable innovations in feeding system design. Organisms that have enclosed themselves in protective shells must develop new ways to capture and process food without exposing vulnerable tissues to potential predators. This leads to the evolution of extensible feeding apparatus that can reach outside protective barriers while remaining securely anchored within them. Some armored organisms develop sophisticated filtering systems that can extract nutrients from water that flows through their shells, while others evolve grasping appendages that can capture food items and bring them safely inside protective barriers. The mechanical systems required for these feeding innovations represent significant advances in biological engineering. The reproductive challenges faced by heavily armored organisms drive the evolution of remarkably sophisticated reproductive strategies and anatomical adaptations. The process of bringing together genetic material from different individuals becomes significantly more complex when both partners are encased in protective shells. This leads to the development of specialized reproductive appendages and behaviors that can function despite defensive barriers. Some species solve the reproduction challenge by developing specialized periods when defensive barriers can be temporarily reduced or modified to allow reproductive access. Others evolve mechanical systems that can function through small openings in protective structures. The coordination required for these reproductive behaviors represents a significant advance in behavioral complexity. The hydrodynamic challenges associated with armored lifestyles lead to remarkable innovations in shell and armor design that minimize drag and turbulence while maintaining protective effectiveness. Some organisms develop shells with complex surface patterns that actually reduce drag compared to smooth surfaces, using principles that parallel modern understanding of fluid dynamics. Streamlined shell shapes emerge that provide excellent protection while allowing efficient swimming. These designs often incorporate features like ridges and grooves that help direct water flow around the protective structure in ways that minimize energy expenditure during locomotion. The mathematical precision of these hydrodynamic adaptations demonstrates evolution's ability to solve complex engineering problems through patient trial and refinement. The chemical defense strategies that emerge during this period represent some of evolution's most creative solutions to protection challenges. Rather than relying solely on physical barriers, some organisms begin to develop chemical compounds that make them unpalatable or toxic to potential predators. These chemical defenses can be highly effective while requiring much smaller investments of materials and energy than physical armor. The development of chemical defense systems requires sophisticated biochemical machinery for producing, storing, and deploying toxic or unpalatable compounds. Some organisms develop specialized glands that can produce defensive chemicals on demand, while others maintain constant levels of protective compounds throughout their tissues. The regulation of these chemical defense systems requires precise metabolic control to ensure that defensive compounds don't interfere with normal cellular functions. Warning coloration begins to appear as organisms that possess chemical defenses develop visual signals that advertise their unpalatability to potential predators. These warning signals must be conspicuous enough to be effective deterrents, while not making their bearers overly visible to other types of threats. The balance between advertising defensive capabilities and maintaining concealment represents a complex optimization problem that drives the evolution of sophisticated coloration patterns. The mimicry systems that begin to emerge during this period represent some of the most sophisticated deception strategies in the natural world. Organisms that lack chemical defenses begin to evolve coloration and behavior patterns that mimic those of genuinely dangerous or unpalatable species. These mimicry systems require precise coordination between multiple aspects of an organism's appearance and behavior to create convincing deceptions. The coevolutionary relationships that develop between mimics and their models create complex webs of interaction that influence the evolution of entire communities. The effectiveness of mimicry depends on the relative abundance of models and mimics, creating dynamic feedback systems that help regulate population sizes and distribution patterns. Camouflage represents another major category of defensive innovation that emerges during this period. Rather than advertising their presence through warning signals or relying on physical protection, some organisms develop the ability to blend seamlessly with their environment and avoid detection entirely. The development of effective camouflage requires sophisticated control over coloration, texture, and behavior to create concealment that can fool increasingly sophisticated predatory senses. Some organisms develop dynamic camouflage systems that can change rapidly to match different backgrounds and lighting conditions. These active camouflage systems require complex nervous system control and sophisticated cellular machinery for rapid color change. The speed and precision of these camouflage responses represent significant advances in neuromuscular coordination. The behavioral components of camouflage become increasingly sophisticated as organisms learn to modify their movements and activities to enhance their concealment. This includes developing abilities to remain motionless for extended periods, to move in ways that don't create detectable disturbances in the surrounding environment, and to position themselves in locations where their camouflage is most effective. The social aspects of defense begin to emerge as organisms discover the benefits of group protection strategies. Early aggregations of individuals provide protection through simple dilution effects, reducing the probability that any particular individual will be targeted by predators. These simple groupings gradually evolve into more sophisticated social structures with specialized roles and coordinated defensive behaviors. Some species develop alarm systems that allow individuals to warn others about approaching threats. These communication systems require the evolution of specialized signaling capabilities and the behavioral systems needed to respond appropriately to warning signals. The coordination of group defensive responses represents a significant advance in social behavior and communication. The construction of communal defensive structures represents one of the most sophisticated achievements of this period. Some organisms begin to work together to create protective barriers and refugia that benefit entire communities. These early examples of cooperative construction require complex coordination between multiple individuals and represent the beginnings of ecological engineering by animal communities. As you observe these remarkable defensive innovations unfolding over millions of years, you begin to appreciate the incredible creativity and ingenuity that characterizes evolution's response to the challenges of predation. What emerges is not a world dominated by fear and violence, but rather a world where life discovers countless elegant ways to create beauty and safety through the patient refinement of biological architecture. The water around you shimmers with the reflected light from countless tiny shells and protective structures, creating an underwater galaxy of biological jewelry that speaks to evolution's aesthetic sensibilities as well as its engineering capabilities. The gentle movements of armored creatures through the ancient seas create new patterns of light and shadow that add to the visual richness of this underwater world. The chemical signatures of defensive compounds and protective materials create new layers of complexity in the ocean's chemistry, adding novel molecules and reaction pathways that will influence the evolution of marine chemistry for millions of years to come. The mineral extraction activities of shell-building organisms begin to affect the availability of dissolved materials throughout the ocean, creating new selective pressures and opportunities for other forms of life. The mechanical innovations developed during this period establish engineering principles that will be refined and elaborated throughout the subsequent history of life. The solutions to problems of protection, mobility, and resource utilization that emerge during this early period provide templates that will be used and modified by countless future lineages facing similar challenges. As you continue floating through these ancient waters, carried gently forward by the currents of evolutionary time, you begin to witness one of the most remarkable and beautiful transformations in the history of life on Earth. The development of protective armor and sophisticated movement has set the stage for perhaps evolution's greatest masterpiece, the emergence of vision. What unfolds before you is not just the simple ability to detect light, but the gradual development of true sight, the capacity to form images and perceive the world in ways that will forever change the nature of life in these ancient seas. The story of vision begins with something far simpler and more humble than the complex eyes you might imagine. In the warm, sunlit waters of the ancient oceans, some organisms begin to develop small patches of cells that are slightly more sensitive to light than their neighbors. These earliest photoreceptive cells are remarkably simple, perhaps nothing more than ordinary cells that have accumulated light-sensitive pigments that allow them to detect the difference between light and darkness. Yet, even these simple light-detecting patches represent profound innovations in biological architecture. The organisms that possess them gain access to an entirely new dimension of environmental information. They can sense the daily rhythms of sunlight, detect the shadows cast by other organisms, and navigate using the gentle gradients of illumination that characterize their underwater world. This new sensory capability provides subtle advantages that, accumulated over millions of years, will drive some of the most spectacular innovations in the history of evolution. The chemical processes involved in detecting light are marvels of molecular engineering that rival the most sophisticated human technologies. Light-sensitive pigments must be able to absorb photons of specific wavelengths and convert that light energy into electrical signals that can be processed by the organism's nervous system. This requires precise molecular architectures that can undergo controlled changes in response to light exposure while remaining stable enough to function reliably over extended periods. The evolution of these light-sensitive molecules involves the modification of existing cellular components, often pigments that originally served entirely different functions, such as protection from harmful radiation or participation in metabolic processes. Evolution discovers that these molecules can be repurposed and refined to create sophisticated light detection systems that operate with remarkable efficiency and precision. As millions of years pass, these simple light-detecting patches begin to evolve into more sophisticated structures that can provide increasingly detailed information about the visual environment. Some organisms develop ways to focus light more effectively by creating simple lens-like structures from transparent cellular materials. Others evolved ways to gather light from larger areas by developing curved photoreceptive surfaces that can collect illumination from multiple directions simultaneously. The development of image-forming vision represents one of evolution's most complex engineering challenges. To create a useful image, an eye must be able to focus light from different directions onto different parts of a photoreceptive surface, creating a spatial map of the surrounding environment. This requires precise optical systems that can control the path of light rays with remarkable accuracy while maintaining clarity and contrast across a wide range of lighting conditions. The compound eyes that begin to appear during this period represent one of evolution's most elegant solutions to the challenge of image formation. Rather than attempting to create a single large optical system like the camera eyes that will evolve much later, compound eyes use arrays of small, individual optical units called ommatidia, each one functioning as a tiny, independent eye that contributes to the overall visual picture. Each ommatidium is a masterpiece of miniaturized optical engineering, containing its own lens system, photoreceptive cells, and neural processing components. The lens focuses light onto the photoreceptors with remarkable precision, while specialized cells surrounding the optical system prevent light from leaking between adjacent ommatidia and degrading the image quality. The entire structure is precisely aligned and coordinated to ensure that the images from individual ommatidia combine to create coherent visual information. The mathematical precision required to construct effective compound eyes demonstrates evolution's ability to solve complex geometric and optical problems through patient trial and refinement. The spacing between ommatidia, the curvature of the overall eye surface, and the focal lengths of individual lenses must all be precisely coordinated to create effective vision. The angles at which different ommatidia point must be carefully calculated to provide appropriate coverage of the visual field without unnecessary overlap or gaps. Some of the earliest compound eyes contain only a few dozen ommatidia, providing relatively crude visual information that nonetheless represents a revolutionary advance over simple light detection. These early visual systems could detect movement, distinguish between objects of different sizes, and provide basic information about the direction and distance of other organisms in the environment. As evolutionary time progresses, compound eyes become increasingly sophisticated, with some species developing eyes containing thousands of individual ommatidia that can create remarkably detailed images. The neural processing systems required to integrate information from so many individual optical units represent significant advances in nervous system complexity and coordination. The three-dimensional structure of compound eyes allows for remarkable flexibility in visual system design. Some organisms develop eyes that wrap around large portions of their heads, providing nearly spherical fields of view that can detect motion and objects from almost any direction. Others develop specialized eye regions with different properties, some areas optimized for detecting motion, others designed for high-resolution examination of nearby objects. The development of color vision represents another major breakthrough in visual capability that emerges during this period. Rather than simply detecting the intensity of light, some organisms begin to develop photoreceptive systems that can distinguish between different wavelengths of light, allowing them to perceive their world in color. This requires the evolution of multiple types of light-sensitive pigments, each one tuned to absorb light most efficiently at different wavelengths. The first color vision systems are relatively simple, perhaps able to distinguish only between 2 or 3 broad categories of color. But even this basic color discrimination provides valuable information about the environment that can be used for finding food, identifying potential mates, and detecting camouflage predators or prey. The ability to see color adds an entirely new dimension to the visual world that makes it richer and more informative. Some organisms develop color vision capabilities that extend beyond the range of wavelengths visible to modern human eyes, including sensitivity to ultraviolet and infrared radiation. These extended visual capabilities allow them to see patterns and details that are completely invisible to organisms with more limited color vision. Flowers, shells, and other biological structures often display elaborate patterns when viewed in ultraviolet light that are imperceptible under normal illumination. The development of polarized light detection represents yet another sophisticated visual capability that emerges during this period. Light waves oscillate in specific orientations as they travel through space, and the ability to detect these polarization patterns provides additional information about the surrounding environment. Polarized light detection can be used for navigation, since the polarization patterns of sunlight change in predictable ways throughout the day and can serve as a kind of natural compass. Some organisms develop remarkable abilities to use polarized light for underwater navigation, even when the sun is obscured by clouds or when they are at depths where direct sunlight is no longer visible. The polarization patterns created by scattered light provide consistent directional information that can be used for long-distance navigation and orientation. The integration of visual information with other sensory systems creates opportunities for sophisticated behavioral responses that represent major advances in neural complexity. Organisms must learn to coordinate visual input with information from chemical sensors, mechanoreceptors, and other sensory systems to create coherent pictures of their environment and make appropriate behavioral decisions. The development of visual attention and selective perception allows organisms to focus their visual processing capabilities on the most important aspects of their environment while filtering out irrelevant information. This requires sophisticated neural control systems that can dynamically adjust the sensitivity and processing of different parts of the visual system based on behavioral context and environmental conditions. Eye movements and gaze control systems emerge as important components of advanced visual systems, allowing organisms to direct their visual attention precisely and track moving objects with remarkable accuracy. The coordination of eye movements with body movements and other behaviors requires complex neural control systems that represent significant advances in sensor-motor integration. The predatory applications of advanced vision transform the nature of hunting in the ancient seas. Predators with sophisticated visual systems could detect prey at much greater distances, track moving targets with greater precision, and coordinate complex attack behaviors that take advantage of visual information about prey behavior and environmental conditions. Visual hunting strategies become increasingly sophisticated as predators learn to use camouflage, stealth, and coordinated group behaviors that take advantage of their enhanced visual capabilities. Some predators develop specialized hunting techniques that exploit the visual blind spots or limitations of their prey, while others learn to use environmental features like shadows and background patterns to conceal their approach. The defensive responses to visual predation drive remarkable innovations in camouflage, warning displays, and escape behaviors among prey organisms. The development of sophisticated predatory vision creates strong selective pressure for equally sophisticated visual defenses, leading to evolutionary arms races that drive rapid innovation in both camouflage technology and predator detection capabilities. Some prey organisms develop remarkable abilities to detect the eyes of approaching predators, using the distinctive optical properties of eyes to identify threats even when the predators are otherwise well camouflaged. This leads to the evolution of predatory eyes with specialized adaptations to reduce their detectability, including non-reflective surfaces and positioning that minimizes their visibility from certain angles. The social implications of vision are equally profound, as the ability to see other members of the same species opens up entirely new possibilities for communication and coordination. Visual signals can convey information much more quickly and precisely than chemical or acoustic signals, allowing for rapid coordination of group behaviors and complex social interactions. Some organisms develop elaborate visual display behaviors that use body coloration, posturing, and movement to communicate information about identity, reproductive status, territorial claims, and other socially important messages. These visual communication systems require the coordinated evolution of both signal production capabilities and signal recognition systems. The mating behaviors that emerge during this period often involve spectacular visual displays that demonstrate the remarkable aesthetic capabilities that can evolve through sexual selection. Some organisms develop elaborate coloration patterns, ornamental structures, or complex behavioral displays that serve to attract mates and demonstrate individual fitness and genetic quality. The navigation capabilities made possible by advanced vision transform the geographic scope of organism movements and migrations. Visual landmarks, celestial navigation using the sun and stars, and the ability to recognize familiar territories allow for much more sophisticated movement patterns and habitat use strategies. Some organisms develop remarkable abilities to navigate across vast distances using visual cues, creating some of the first long-distance migration routes in Earth's history. These navigation capabilities require sophisticated memory systems and the ability to integrate visual information collected over extended periods and across changing environmental conditions. The impact of vision on ecosystem structure and function is profound and far-reaching. The ability to see at a distance changes the spatial scale over which ecological interactions occur, creating new types of predator-prey relationships and competitive interactions that operate across much larger areas than was previously possible. Visual predators can maintain territories and patrol hunting areas that are orders of magnitude larger than those that could be effectively monitored using only chemical or tactile senses. This changes the population dynamics and spatial distribution of both predators and prey throughout the marine environment. The development of visual systems also creates new ecological niches related to light manipulation and optical environments. Some organisms begin to specialize in creating or modifying light conditions to their advantage, developing bioluminescent capabilities or structures that manipulate the optical properties of their surroundings. Bioluminescence emerges as both a communication tool and a predatory technique, with some organisms developing the ability to produce their own light for signaling, prey attraction, or predator deterrence. The biochemistry of bioluminescence represents a remarkable achievement in biological engineering that involves complex chemical reactions capable of producing light with remarkable efficiency. The daily and seasonal rhythms of light availability create new temporal niches that organisms can exploit through specialized visual adaptations. Some species develop enhanced low-light vision that allows them to remain active during dawn and dusk periods when many other organisms are less visually capable. Others develop specialized adaptations for deep water environments where sunlight is limited or completely absent. The coevolution of visual systems and environmental light conditions creates feedback loops that influence both the evolution of eyes and the optical properties of marine environments. Organisms that depend on vision for survival help shape the light environment through their behavior and habitat modifications, which in turn influences the evolution of visual systems in other organisms. As you observe these remarkable visual innovations unfolding over millions of years, you begin to appreciate how the development of sight has transformed not just individual organisms, but the entire character of life in the ancient seas. The ability to see has created new forms of beauty, new types of communication, and new levels of behavioral complexity that add richness and sophistication to every aspect of marine life. The water around you seems to shimmer with new meaning as you consider how many different types of eyes are now observing the same environment from countless different perspectives. The visual world that surrounds you is being interpreted and reinterpreted by thousands of different optical systems, each one creating its own unique picture of reality based on its particular capabilities and limitations. The gentle movements of organisms through the ancient seas take on new significance when you realize that many of them are now guided by vision, that the graceful swimming patterns and complex behaviors you observe are coordinated responses to visual information gathered through some of evolution's most sophisticated optical instruments. The interplay of light and life in these ancient waters creates patterns of interaction and communication that operate at the speed of light itself. allowing for real-time coordination and response that was impossible in the pre-visual world. The ancient seas have become a theater of visual communication where countless organisms participate in displays, signals, and interactions that create a rich tapestry of optical information flowing through the three-dimensional environment of the ocean. As you continue floating through these transformed waters, carried gently forward by millions more years of evolutionary time, you begin to witness another remarkable chapter in life's patient journey toward complexity and beauty. The development of sophisticated vision has created new challenges and opportunities that inspire innovations in the very architecture of life itself. What emerges is not simply better ways of seeing, but fundamentally improved ways of being. More efficient bodies, more elegant forms, and more sophisticated approaches to the basic challenges of existence in an increasingly complex world. The transformation begins with subtle changes in body proportions and structure that optimize organisms for the new realities of life in a world where vision has become crucial for survival. The creatures that possess advanced visual systems must be able to move quickly and precisely to take advantage of the information their eyes provide. This creates selective pressure for bodies that are more streamlined, more agile, and more responsive to rapid changes in direction and speed. The earliest improvements appear in the basic architecture of locomotion systems. Organisms begin to develop more sophisticated arrangements of muscles and skeletal support structures that can generate greater speed and more precise control over movement. Where earlier creatures might have possessed simple, undulating body plans suitable for gentle swimming through peaceful waters, the new generation develops segmented muscle systems that can work together in complex coordination to produce rapid acceleration and precise maneuvering. The development of more efficient muscle systems requires innovations in cellular architecture that represent significant advances in biological engineering. Muscle cells become more specialized, developing enhanced contractile proteins that can generate greater force while operating more efficiently. The organization of muscle fibers becomes more sophisticated, with different fiber types optimized for different functions. Some for sustained swimming, others for rapid bursts of speed, still others for precise positional control. The nervous systems that control these enhanced muscle systems must evolve corresponding improvements in complexity and processing speed. Simple nerve networks that once sufficed for basic sensory responses and gentle movements are replaced by more sophisticated neural architectures capable of rapid information processing and complex motor coordination. The brain regions responsible for motor control expand and develop new organizational patterns that allow for more precise control over body movements. The development of centralized nervous systems represents one of the most significant advances in biological architecture during this period. Rather than relying on distributed nerve networks, where signals must travel through multiple relay points, some organisms begin to develop concentrated nerve centers that can process information more efficiently and coordinate responses more rapidly. These early brain-like structures are still quite simple compared to modern nervous systems, but they represent crucial first steps toward the complex neural architectures that will eventually characterize advanced animal life. The integration of sensory and motor systems becomes increasingly sophisticated as organisms develop the ability to use visual information to guide complex movement patterns. This requires neural circuits that can transform visual input into appropriate motor commands, accounting for factors such as distance, speed, and direction of movement. The mathematical computations required for this sensory-motor integration represent remarkable achievements in biological information processing. The bodies that emerge during this period begin to show clear specialization for different ecological roles and lifestyles. Predatory organisms develop body plans optimized for pursuit and capture, with streamlined forms that minimize drag during high-speed swimming and appendages specialized for grasping and manipulating prey. Their sensory systems become concentrated in anterior regions that can be directed toward targets during pursuit. The body plans of prey organisms show corresponding specializations for detection and escape. Many develop more sensitive sensory systems that can detect approaching predators at greater distances, while their locomotion systems become optimized for rapid escape responses. Some prey species develop body forms that are optimized for maneuverability rather than straight-line speed, allowing them to change direction rapidly and unpredictably during pursuit. The evolution of jointed appendages represents one of the most important innovations in body plan design during this period. Rather than relying solely on whole-body undulation for movement, some organisms begin to develop specialized limbs that can move independently and provide more precise control over locomotion. These early limbs are simple structures, but they establish the basic principles of lever mechanics and joint articulation that will be refined and elaborated throughout the subsequent history of animal life. The engineering challenges involved in creating effective jointed appendages are considerable. Each joint must be strong enough to transmit the forces generated by muscle contractions, while flexible enough to allow the range of motion required for effective locomotion. The materials and construction techniques that evolved to meet these challenges represent significant advances in biological engineering, involving sophisticated combinations of rigid and flexible elements. The development of multiple pairs of appendages allows for increasingly complex locomotion patterns and behaviors. Organisms with several pairs of limbs can coordinate their movements to produce more efficient swimming strokes, more stable walking gaits, and more sophisticated manipulation of objects in their environment. The neural control systems required to coordinate multiple appendages represent major advances in motor control complexity. Some organisms begin to specialize different appendages for different functions, developing the first examples of functional differentiation in animal anatomy. Some limbs might be optimized for swimming, others for grasping food items, and still others for sensory functions or defensive purposes. This functional specialization allows for more efficient performance of different activities while maintaining overall body coordination. The respiratory systems of organisms undergo significant improvements as more active lifestyles increase the demand for efficient oxygen delivery to working muscles. Simple diffusion across body surfaces, which suffice for the gentle metabolic demands of earlier life, is supplemented by more sophisticated respiratory structures that can extract oxygen more efficiently from the surrounding water. Some organisms develop specialized respiratory appendages that increase the surface area available for gas exchange, while creating water currents that bring fresh, oxygen-rich water into contact with respiratory surfaces. These early gills represent significant innovations in biological engineering, involving complex folded structures that maximize surface area while maintaining structural integrity in flowing water. The circulatory systems that deliver oxygen and nutrients to working tissues become more sophisticated as metabolic demands increase. Simple diffusion-based transport systems are supplemented by more active circulation mechanisms that can deliver resources more rapidly and efficiently to tissues throughout the body. Some organisms develop primitive pumping systems that actively move body fluids through circulatory channels. The development of more efficient circulatory systems requires innovations in body architecture that create dedicated channels for fluid flow and pumping mechanisms that can maintain circulation under varying conditions. These early cardiovascular systems are relatively simple compared to modern circulatory systems, but they establish the basic principles of fluid dynamics and pressure-driven flow that characterize all advanced circulatory systems. The digestive systems of organisms also undergo significant improvements as more active lifestyles and more varied diets create new challenges for nutrient extraction and processing. Simple absorption-based feeding systems are supplemented by more sophisticated digestive mechanisms that can break down complex food items and extract nutrients more efficiently. Some organisms develop specialized digestive chambers where food can be processed under controlled conditions, allowing for more efficient breakdown of complex organic molecules. Others evolve mechanical processing systems that can physically break apart food items before chemical digestion begins. The coordination of mechanical and chemical digestive processes represents a significant advance in physiological complexity. The integration of digestive and circulatory systems becomes more sophisticated as organisms develop more efficient mechanisms for distributing nutrients throughout the body. This requires precise coordination between digestive processes that extract nutrients and circulatory processes that transport them to where they are needed most. The waste elimination systems of organisms become more sophisticated as increased metabolic activity generates larger quantities of waste products that must be removed efficiently to maintain physiological balance. Simple diffusion-based waste elimination is supplemented by more active excretory mechanisms that can maintain proper concentrations of dissolved substances in body fluids. Some organisms develop specialized excretory organs that can selectively remove specific waste products while retaining important nutrients and regulatory substances. These early kidney-like structures represent significant advances in physiological regulation and homeostasis, allowing organisms to maintain stable internal conditions despite varying external environments and metabolic demands. The reproductive systems of organisms undergo significant innovations as more complex body plans and active lifestyles create new challenges and opportunities for successful reproduction. The development of specialized reproductive organs and behaviors allows for more efficient transfer of genetic material and better protection of developing offspring. Some organisms develop sophisticated courtship behaviors that take advantage of their enhanced sensory and motor capabilities to attract mates and coordinate reproductive activities. These behaviors often involve complex visual displays, precise movement patterns, and sophisticated timing that demonstrates the remarkable behavioral capabilities that emerge from improved nervous system organization. The care of offspring becomes more sophisticated as organisms develop better abilities to provide protection and resources for their developing young. Some species begin to construct protective structures for their eggs or larvae, while others develop behavioral strategies for defending reproductive areas from potential threats. The developmental processes that create these more complex body plans become increasingly sophisticated, involving precise genetic control systems that can coordinate the formation of specialized tissues and organs. The regulatory mechanisms that control development must be able to create complex three-dimensional structures with proper proportions and functional relationships between different body parts. The genetic innovations that support more complex development include enhanced regulatory systems that can control the timing and location of gene expression with remarkable precision. These regulatory mechanisms allow for the creation of body plans with multiple specialized regions while maintaining overall coordination and integration. The metabolic systems that support more active and complex lifestyles become more efficient and sophisticated, involving enhanced enzyme systems and metabolic pathways that can generate energy more rapidly and efficiently. The coordination of metabolic processes with other physiological systems requires sophisticated regulatory mechanisms that can adjust energy production to match energy demands. Some organisms develop enhanced energy storage systems that allow them to maintain high activity levels even when food resources are temporarily scarce. These energy storage mechanisms involve sophisticated biochemical processes for converting nutrients into stable storage compounds and mobilizing stored energy when needed. The thermal regulation systems of organisms become more important as increased activity levels generate more metabolic heat, and as more complex physiological processes require stable operating temperatures. Some organisms develop behavioral and physiological mechanisms for maintaining optimal body temperatures despite varying environmental conditions. The sensory systems that guide all these enhanced capabilities continue to evolve, increase sophistication and sensitivity. The integration of multiple sensory modalities allows organisms to create more complete and accurate pictures of their environment, leading to more appropriate behavioral responses and better survival outcomes. The communication systems that coordinate social behaviors become more complex as enhanced motor and sensory capabilities allow for more sophisticated signaling between individuals. These communication systems often involve combinations of visual, chemical, and mechanical signals that can convey detailed information about identity, intentions, and environmental conditions. The learning and memory capabilities of organisms increase significantly as more complex lifestyles require the ability to modify behavior based on experience and to remember important information about environmental conditions, food sources, and potential threats. These cognitive capabilities require significant advances in nervous system organization and information processing. The spatial orientation and navigation systems of organisms become more sophisticated as enhanced mobility allows for movement across larger areas and more complex three-dimensional environments. These navigation systems often integrate information from multiple sensory sources to create accurate maps of the surrounding environment and track position and direction of movement. The social organization of organisms begins to show increased complexity as enhanced communication and coordination capabilities allow for more sophisticated group behaviors. Some species develop hierarchical social structures with specialized roles for different individuals, while others evolve cooperative behaviors that benefit entire groups. The ecological relationships between different species become more complex and dynamic as enhanced capabilities for movement, sensing, and behavior create new forms of interaction and interdependence. These ecological networks involve multiple levels of direct and indirect effects that influence the evolution and distribution of entire communities. The environmental engineering capabilities of organisms begin to emerge as some species develop the ability to modify their physical environment in ways that benefit their survival and reproduction. These early examples of ecosystem engineering involve simple construction behaviors and habitat modifications that create new ecological opportunities. As you observe these remarkable innovations in body plan design and physiological capability, you begin to appreciate how the challenges and opportunities created by predator-prey interactions have driven some of evolution's most sophisticated achievements in biological engineering. The organisms floating around you in these ancient seas are no longer the simple, peaceful creatures that characterized earlier periods, but rather sophisticated biological machines capable of remarkable feats of sensing, movement, and behavior. The water that surrounds you pulses with the activities of creatures that have achieved new levels of complexity and capability while maintaining the essential beauty and elegance that characterizes all of evolution's innovations. The gentle movements of these ancient animals through their three-dimensional aquatic environment create patterns of grace and coordination that demonstrate the remarkable achievements possible when natural selection has millions of years to refine and perfect biological design. The chemical signatures of enhanced metabolism and more complex physiology create new layers of information in the ocean's chemistry, while the physical disturbances created by more active swimming and behavior patterns add new dynamics to the flow and mixing of the ancient seas. The entire marine environment has been enriched and enlivened by the emergence of more capable and sophisticated forms of life. As you continue drifting through these ancient waters, carried forward by the gentle currents of evolutionary time, you begin to witness one of the most beautiful and profound developments in the history of life: the emergence of cooperation and collective behavior. The individual innovations in body design and sensory capability that you have observed are now being complemented by something equally remarkable: the discovery that working together can provide advantages that no individual organism could achieve alone. What unfolds before you is not a world dominated by conflict and competition, but rather one where life learns to create safety, efficiency, and beauty through the art of cooperation. The first hints of cooperative behavior appear in the simplest possible form: the tendency for individuals of the same species to aggregate in areas where conditions are favorable. These early gatherings are not truly social in any sophisticated sense, but rather represent the independent responses of many individuals to the same environmental cues. When food is abundant in a particular location, or when water conditions are optimal, multiple organisms naturally converge on these favorable areas, creating loose associations that provide the foundation for more complex social behaviors. These chance aggregations begin to provide unexpected benefits that gradually become incorporated into the behavioral repertoires of the participating organisms. When many individuals are present in the same area, the constant movement and activity of the group creates enhanced water circulation that brings fresh nutrients and oxygen to all members. The feeding activities of multiple individuals can disturb sediments and expose food sources that would remain inaccessible to solitary feeders. Perhaps most importantly, these early aggregations provide a form of protection that emerges naturally from the simple mathematics of predation. When a predator encounters a group of potential prey, it can only capture one individual at a time, meaning that the risk to any particular member of the group is reduced compared to the risk faced by a solitary individual. This dilution effect provides immediate survival benefits that create selective pressure for individuals to seek out and remain with groups of their own kind. The sensory advantages of group living become apparent as organisms discover that many eyes and many sensory systems can detect threats and opportunities much more effectively than any individual could manage alone. The enhanced visual capabilities that have evolved in recent geological ages become even more powerful when multiplied across many individuals. A group can maintain surveillance over a much larger area and can detect approaching predators from greater distances than any single organism. The communication systems that begin to develop to coordinate group activities represent some of evolution's most elegant solutions to the challenges of collective behavior. Early warning systems emerge that allow individuals who detect threats to alert other members of their group through simple but effective signaling mechanisms. These signals might involve rapid movements, color changes, or the release of chemical alarm substances that can spread quickly through the surrounding water. The development of collective alarm responses creates some of the first examples of truly coordinated group behavior. When one individual detects a threat and issues an alarm signal, the entire group can respond simultaneously, creating mass escape behaviors that are far more effective than individual flight responses. These coordinated escape behaviors often involve complex movement patterns that can confuse predators and make it difficult for them to focus on any particular target. The mathematical principles underlying effective group defense strategies begin to be discovered through the patient trial and refinement of evolutionary processes. Optimal group sizes emerge that balance the benefits of collective vigilance and protection against the costs of increased competition for resources. Spatial arrangements develop that maximize defensive effectiveness while maintaining group cohesion and coordination. Some of the most spectacular collective behaviors to emerge during this period involve the formation of dense, coordinated aggregations that move through the water like living clouds. These early schools and swarms represent remarkable achievements in collective coordination, with hundreds or thousands of individuals moving together in synchronized patterns that create the illusion of a single, enormous organism. The coordination mechanisms that make these collective movements possible require sophisticated sensory and motor integration systems. Each individual must be able to monitor the positions and movements of its nearest neighbors, while simultaneously adjusting its own movements to maintain proper spacing and alignment with the group. The neural processing required for this constant coordination represents a significant advance in behavioral complexity. The hydrodynamic advantages of collective swimming become apparent as groups discover that coordinated movement can reduce the energy costs of locomotion for all participants. By swimming in precise formations, group members can take advantage of the water currents created by their neighbors, reducing drag and allowing for more efficient long-distance travel. These early examples of formation swimming establish principles that will be refined and perfected throughout the subsequent history of aquatic life. The feeding strategies that emerge in group living organisms demonstrate remarkable innovations in resource acquisition and sharing. Some groups develop coordinated feeding behaviors that allow them to exploit food sources that would be inaccessible to individual feeders. By working together, group members can disturb larger areas of seafloor, create stronger feeding currents, or overwhelm the defensive responses of prey organisms. Cooperative hunting behaviors begin to appear among some predatory species, representing some of the first examples of coordinated group activities directed towards specific goals. These early hunting cooperatives are relatively simple compared to the sophisticated pack hunting behaviors that will evolve much later, but they demonstrate the basic principles of task division and coordination that characterize all effective group hunting strategies. The role specialization that begins to emerge in some cooperative groups represents a fundamental innovation in social organization. Rather than having all group members perform identical functions, some groups begin to develop systems where different individuals take on specialized roles that contribute to the overall success of the group. Some individuals might specialize in sentinel duties, maintaining vigilance for threats, while others focus on feeding activities. The communication systems that coordinate these specialized roles become increasingly sophisticated, involving complex signaling protocols that can convey detailed information about environmental conditions, threat levels, and resource availability. These communication networks create the first examples of information sharing systems that allow group members to benefit from the knowledge and experience of other individuals. The learning and cultural transmission systems that emerge in social groups represent remarkable advances in information processing and storage. Groups can accumulate knowledge about their environment that exceeds what any individual could learn during its lifetime. Information about feeding locations, migration routes, and threat avoidance strategies can be passed between group members and even transmitted from one generation to the next. These early cultural systems create positive feedback loops that accelerate the development of more sophisticated group behaviors. As groups become more effective at information sharing and collective learning, they become more successful at survival and reproduction, which creates selective pressure for even more advanced social and cognitive capabilities. The territorial behaviors that develop in some social groups represent sophisticated strategies for resource management and conflict avoidance. Rather than competing directly with other groups for access to resources, some species develop systems for dividing up available habitat and establishing exclusive access to particular areas. These territorial systems require complex communication and recognition systems that allow groups to identify their boundaries and negotiate with neighboring groups. The construction activities that emerge in some social groups represent the first examples of collective engineering projects in the history of life. Groups begin to work together to modify their environment in ways that benefit all group members, creating structures that provide shelter, improve feeding opportunities, or enhance protection from predators. These early construction projects involve relatively simple activities like the coordinated excavation of burrows or the arrangement of materials to create protective barriers. However, they establish the basic principles of cooperative engineering that will eventually lead to some of the most spectacular construction projects in the natural world. The reproductive strategies that evolve in social groups often involve sophisticated forms of cooperation that enhance the reproductive success of all group members. Some groups develop cooperative breeding systems where multiple individuals contribute to the care and protection of offspring, even when they're not the biological parents. These altruistic behaviors represent remarkable examples of cooperation that benefit the group as a whole. The mate selection and courtship behaviors that occur within social groups become increasingly elaborate and sophisticated, often involving complex displays and competitions that allow potential mates to assess each other's quality and compatibility. These social mating systems create opportunities for sexual selection to operate in new ways, driving the evolution of elaborate ornamental features and sophisticated behavioral displays. The conflict resolution mechanisms that develop in social groups represent important innovations in maintaining group cohesion and preventing disruptive conflicts between group members. These early diplomatic systems involve ritualized displays and submission behaviors that allow disputes to be resolved without physical violence that could damage group unity. The hierarchy and leadership systems that emerge in some groups create more efficient decision-making processes and coordination mechanisms. Rather than requiring consensus from all group members for every decision, Some groups develop systems where certain individuals take leadership roles and can guide group activities more efficiently. The migration and navigation capabilities of social groups often exceed those of individual organisms, as groups can pool their navigation knowledge and maintain more accurate course headings over long distances. The collective memory of migration routes and seasonal patterns allows groups to make more successful long-distance movements than any individual could accomplish alone. The seasonal and daily activity patterns of social groups become more complex and coordinated as groups develop the ability to synchronize their activities for maximum efficiency. These temporal coordination systems allow groups to take advantage of optimal conditions for feeding, reproduction, and migration while avoiding periods when risks are highest. The predator avoidance strategies that evolve in social groups represent some of the most sophisticated anti-predator behaviors in the natural world. Groups can employ multiple defensive strategies simultaneously, including vigilance networks, coordinated escape responses, mobbing behaviors that drive away threats, and confusion effects that make it difficult for predators to target individual prey. The habitat modification activities of social groups begin to have significant effects on marine ecosystems, as the collective activities of large groups can alter water flow patterns, sediment distribution, and nutrient cycling in their environment. These ecosystem engineering effects create new ecological opportunities and help shape the evolution of entire communities. The information processing capabilities of social groups often exceed those of individual brains, as groups can integrate information from multiple sources and process complex environmental data more effectively than any single organism. These collective intelligence systems represent early examples of distributed cognitive processing that will become increasingly important throughout the evolution of social behavior. The adaptive flexibility of social groups allows them to respond more effectively to changing environmental conditions than individual organisms. Groups can modify their behavior, social structure, and activity patterns in response to new challenges while maintaining the stability and coordination needed for effective group function. The energy efficiency advantages of social living become increasingly apparent as groups develop more sophisticated coordination mechanisms. Collective behaviors often require less energy per individual than equivalent individual behaviors, while providing superior results in terms of resource acquisition, predator avoidance, and environmental exploitation. The stress reduction benefits of social living emerge as individuals in well-functioning groups experience lower levels of physiological stress than solitary individuals. The social support provided by group membership helps buffer individuals against environmental challenges and provides psychological benefits that enhance overall health and survival. The innovation and problem-solving capabilities of social groups often exceed those of individuals, as groups can combine the creative abilities of multiple individuals and can experiment with multiple approaches to challenges simultaneously. These collective innovation systems accelerate the development of new behaviors and strategies. The cultural evolution that begins to occur in social groups represents a new form of adaptive change that operates much faster than genetic evolution. Groups can develop and refine new behaviors within single generations, allowing for rapid adaptation to changing conditions without waiting for genetic changes to accumulate. As you observe these remarkable developments in social behavior and cooperation, you begin to appreciate how the challenges of survival in a world with predators and prey have inspired some of evolution's most beautiful and sophisticated solutions. The groups of organisms moving through the ancient seas around you demonstrate that life's response to challenge is not simply to become more aggressive or more defensive, but rather to discover new forms of collaboration and mutual support. The water that surrounds you pulses with the coordinated activities of countless social groups, each one representing a unique solution to the challenges of collective living. The synchronized movements of schools and swarms create patterns of beauty and elegance that transform the ancient seas into a living ballet of cooperation and coordination. The chemical communication networks that link members of social groups create invisible highways of information that crisscross the marine environment, carrying messages of alarm, attraction, coordination, and cooperation. The acoustic signatures of group activities add new dimensions to the underwater soundscape, while the hydrodynamic effects of collective movements create new patterns of water flow and mixing throughout the ancient oceans. The emergence of cooperation represents one of evolution's greatest achievements, demonstrating that the ultimate response to the challenges of life is not conflict and competition, but rather the discovery of ways to work together for mutual benefit. In these ancient seas, life is learning that the whole can be greater than the sum of its parts, and that the most effective strategies for survival and success often involve helping others to thrive as well. As you continue your peaceful journey through these ancient waters, carried forward by the gentle currents of evolutionary time, you begin to witness one of nature's most subtle and elegant innovations, the development of chemical communication and defense systems. What emerges is not the violent warfare that the term might suggest, but rather a sophisticated world of molecular messages, invisible signals, and gentle deterrents that operate through the language of chemistry itself. This chemical dimension of life transforms the ancient seas into a vast communication network where organisms speak to each other through molecules, creating one of the most beautiful and complex information systems in the natural world. The story of biological chemistry begins with the simplest possible chemical signals, the natural byproducts of cellular metabolism that leak out into the surrounding water and provide inadvertent information about the presence and activities of different organisms. Every living creature releases a constant stream of dissolved molecules as it goes about its daily activities, creating chemical signatures that are as unique and identifiable as fingerprints. These metabolic signatures begin to be noticed and utilized by other organisms as sources of environmental information. Predators learn to recognize the chemical traces left by their preferred prey species, while prey organisms develop sensitivities to the metabolic byproducts of their predators. What starts as accidental chemical leakage gradually becomes incorporated into the sensory repertoires of marine organisms as a valuable source of information about their environment. The evolution of enhanced chemoreception capabilities represents one of the most significant advances in sensory biology during this period. Organisms develop increasingly sophisticated chemical sensing systems that can detect and distinguish between thousands of different molecular compounds dissolved in the surrounding water. These chemical sensors become so sensitive that they can detect individual molecules among billions of water molecules, providing information about distant events and activities. The development of purposeful chemical signaling represents a major breakthrough in biological communication. Rather than relying solely on the accidental chemical leakage of normal metabolism, some organisms begin to produce specific signaling molecules designed to convey particular types of information to other organisms. These early chemical signals are relatively simple, but they establish the foundation for communication systems of remarkable sophistication and complexity. The first intentional chemical signals often serve as alarm systems, allowing organisms to warn others of their species about approaching threats. When an individual detects a predator or experiences stress from an attack, it releases specific alarm chemicals that can spread rapidly through the surrounding water and alert other individuals to the presence of danger. These alarm pheromones create expanding spheres of chemical information that can warn entire communities about threats. The chemistry of alarm signals involves remarkable molecular engineering, as these compounds must be stable enough to persist in the aquatic environment while remaining detectable at very low concentrations. They must also be specific enough to convey clear information about the type and severity of threat while being recognizable to the intended recipients. The biochemical pathways that produce these signaling molecules represent significant innovations in cellular chemistry. The response systems that evolve to detect and interpret chemical alarm signals require sophisticated neural processing capabilities. Organisms must be able to distinguish between different types of chemical signals, assess the reliability of the information they convey, and coordinate appropriate behavioral responses. The integration of chemical information with other sensory input creates more complete pictures of environmental conditions and threats. The development of species-specific chemical signals allows for more precise and targeted communication between individuals. Rather than broadcasting general alarm signals that might be detected by predators as well as intended recipients, some organisms evolve chemical communication systems that use molecular codes that can only be interpreted by members of their own species. These private communication channels provide significant advantages in avoiding detection by eavesdropping predators. The chemical trail systems that begin to emerge during this period create some of the first examples of persistent information storage in the natural world. Organisms that move through their environment leave behind chemical traces that can be detected and followed by other individuals, creating invisible pathways that can guide navigation, foraging, and social interactions. These chemical trails can persist for extended periods, providing information about past activities and movements. The territory marking behaviors that develop in some species involve the strategic placement of chemical signals that convey information about ownership, identity, and reproductive status. These chemical markers create invisible boundaries and information networks that help organize the use of space and resources while minimizing direct conflicts between individuals and groups. The chemical defense systems that evolved during this period represent some of evolution's most creative solutions to the challenges of predator deterrence. Rather than relying solely on physical barriers, speed, or camouflage, some organisms begin to develop chemical compounds that make them unpalatable, toxic, or otherwise undesirable to potential predators. These chemical defenses can be highly effective while requiring relatively modest investments of energy and materials. The biochemistry of chemical defense involves the evolution of specialized metabolic pathways that can produce compounds with specific deterrent properties. Some organisms develop the ability to concentrate toxic substances from their environment and store them in specialized tissues where they can provide protection without interfering with normal cellular functions. Others evolve entirely novel biochemical pathways that can synthesize deterrent compound from basic cellular building blocks. The deployment systems for chemical defenses become increasingly sophisticated as organisms develop more precise control over when and how defensive chemicals are released. Some species develop the ability to release defensive compounds only when threatened, conserving their chemical resources while maintaining effective protection. Others create defensive compounds that are activated only when cells are damaged, providing automatic protection against predatory attacks. The warning coloration systems that co-evolve with chemical defenses create visual advertisements that help potential predators learn to avoid chemically defended prey. These warning signals must be conspicuous enough to be easily learned and remembered, while being consistent enough across individuals and populations to create reliable associations between appearance and chemical protection. The evolution of warning coloration represents a sophisticated form of honest signaling that benefits both predators and prey. The mimicry systems that emerge in response to warning coloration demonstrate evolution's remarkable creativity in the realm of deception and communication. Organisms that lack chemical defenses but can mimic the appearance of defended species gain protection without the metabolic costs of producing defensive compounds. These mimicry systems create complex evolutionary relationships that influence the evolution of entire communities. The chemical camouflage systems that develop in some species involve the production of compounds that mask or alter their natural chemical signatures, making them more difficult to detect by chemically guided predators. Some organisms develop the ability to absorb and incorporate chemical signals from their environment, allowing them to blend in chemically with their surroundings, much as visual camouflage allows them to blend in visually. The chemical mimicry systems that evolve in some predatory species allow them to exploit the chemical communication systems of their prey for hunting purposes. These predators can produce chemical signals that mimic the alarm pheromones, attractant compounds, or other signals used by their prey species, allowing them to manipulate prey behavior and improve their hunting success. The detoxification systems that evolve in organisms exposed to chemical defenses represent remarkable achievements in biochemical engineering. These systems can neutralize or metabolize toxic compounds before they cause cellular damage, allowing organisms to feed on chemically defended prey or tolerate exposure to environmental toxins. The enzymes involved in detoxification often show remarkable specificity and efficiency in their ability to process harmful compounds. The chemical arms races that develop between chemically defended prey and their predators drive continuous innovation in both defensive and offensive chemical capabilities. As prey species develop more effective chemical defenses, predators evolve enhanced detoxification systems or alternative strategies for dealing with chemical protection. These evolutionary arms races create cycles of innovation that drive increasing sophistication in chemical warfare systems. The social chemical communication systems that emerge in group-living species create complex networks of information sharing that coordinate collective behaviors. These systems often involve multiple types of chemical signals that convey different categories of information. Identity signals that allow individuals to recognize group members, coordination signals that synchronize group activities, and status signals that help maintain social hierarchies. The chemical mate recognition and courtship systems that develop during this period create sophisticated mechanisms for species identification and sexual selection. Chemical signals can convey detailed information about species identity, genetic quality, reproductive status, and individual fitness, allowing for more precise mate choice and more effective reproductive strategies. The chemical signals involved in courtship and mating often involve complex molecular structures that can convey multiple types of information simultaneously. These compounds must be specific enough to prevent cross-species mating while being variable enough to allow for individual recognition and quality assessment. The chemistry of these signals often involves elaborate biosynthetic pathways that produce unique molecular signatures. The pheromone production and detection systems that coordinate reproductive activities become increasingly sophisticated, involving specialized organs for chemical signal production and highly sensitive detection systems that can respond to extremely low concentrations of signaling molecules. The timing and regulation of pheromone release often involves complex physiological control systems that coordinate chemical signaling with reproductive cycles. The chemical navigation systems that emerge during this period allow organisms to use dissolved chemical gradients for long-distance orientation and navigation. These systems can detect and follow chemical plumes that originate from distant sources, providing information about the direction and distance to important resources, breeding areas, or safe habitats. The chemical memory systems that develop in some species allow individuals to learn and remember chemical signatures associated with important environmental features, food sources, or social relationships. These chemical learning systems can store information about environmental chemistry for extended periods and use this information to guide future behavior and decision-making. The chemical pollution and cleanup systems that emerge as chemical communication becomes more widespread involve mechanisms for maintaining water quality and preventing the accumulation of chemical signals that could interfere with communication effectiveness. Some organisms develop the ability to metabolize and neutralize chemical signals after they have served their communication function. The seasonal and daily cycles in chemical communication create temporal patterns in the underwater chemical environment that coordinate community-wide activities and behaviors. These chemical rhythms often synchronize with environmental cycles and help coordinate reproductive activities, migration behaviors, and other time-sensitive biological processes. The chemical ecosystem engineering that begins during this period involves the use of chemical signals to modify environmental conditions in ways that benefit the signaling organisms. Some species release chemicals that can alter the behavior of other organisms, modify local environmental chemistry, or create chemical barriers that influence the movement and distribution of other species. The chemical information processing systems that develop in organisms exposed to complex chemical environments become increasingly sophisticated, involving neural circuits that can integrate information from multiple chemical sources and make complex decisions based on chemical input. These chemical cognitive systems represent early examples of chemically mediated intelligence in decision-making. The chemical symbiosis systems that emerge involve mutualistic relationships where different species exchange chemical signals or chemical services that benefit both partners. These chemical partnerships can involve relationships between species that produce complementary chemical compounds or that provide chemical protection or communication services for each other. The chemical preservation and storage systems that develop allow organisms to maintain stable concentrations of important chemical signals or defensive compounds despite varying environmental conditions. These systems often involve specialized tissues or organs that can concentrate, store, and release chemical compounds as needed. The chemical sensitivity and adaptation systems that evolve allow organisms to adjust their chemical production and detection capabilities in response to changing environmental conditions. These adaptive systems can modify the sensitivity of chemical sensors, alter the production rates of chemical signals, or change the specificity of chemical recognition systems. As you observe these remarkable developments in chemical communication and defense, you begin to appreciate how the ancient seas have been transformed into a vast, invisible network of molecular information. The water around you carries thousands of different chemical messages, alarm signals warning of danger, attractant compounds guiding organisms toward food or mates, territorial markers defining invisible boundaries, and defensive compounds protecting their producers from harm. The chemical landscape of these ancient oceans is as complex and dynamic as their visual appearance, with concentration gradients, chemical plumes, and molecular signals creating a constantly changing pattern of information flow. Every breath of water that flows past the organisms around you carries news of distant events, social messages, warnings, invitations, and chemical signatures that tell the stories of countless individual lives and interactions. The gentle circulation of these chemically rich waters creates mixing patterns that distribute molecular information throughout the three-dimensional environment of the ocean, while chemical breakdown and renewal processes ensure that the chemical communication system remains dynamic and responsive to current conditions rather than being overwhelmed by outdated information. The evolution of chemical communication and defense represents one of nature's most elegant solutions to the challenges of survival and social coordination, demonstrating that effective communication and protection can be achieved through molecular precision and biochemical sophistication rather than through force or aggression. In these ancient seas, life has learned to speak this subtle language of chemistry, creating a world where information, protection, and cooperation flow through the gentle currents as streams of invisible molecules. As you drift forward through the flowing currents of deep time, carried gently into one of the most remarkable periods in Earth's history, you begin to witness an explosion of creativity and innovation that will forever change the nature of life on our planet. This is the Cambrian period, a time when the patient evolutionary processes you have been observing suddenly accelerate into a magnificent burst of biological experimentation. What emerges is not chaos or violence, but rather an elegant flowering of new forms and possibilities that demonstrates life's incredible capacity for creative adaptation. The innovations that have been developing over millions of years, sophisticated vision, chemical communication, cooperative behavior, and enhanced body plans, now combine and interact in ways that create entirely new opportunities for life. The ancient seas become a vast laboratory where evolution experiments with every conceivable approach to the challenges of existence, creating forms so diverse and beautiful that they seem to spring from the imagination of a cosmic artist. The body plans that emerge during this period represent fundamental breakthroughs in biological architecture. For the first time, life discovers how to create complex, segmented bodies with specialized appendages, sophisticated nervous systems, and integrated organ systems that work together with remarkable efficiency. These new body plans establish the basic templates that will be used and refined throughout the subsequent history of animal life. The mineralized skeletons and shells that become widespread during this period transform organisms from soft, vulnerable creatures into living fortresses equipped with sophisticated protective systems. These hard parts are not crude armor, but rather elegant engineering solutions that provide protection while maintaining mobility and function. The mathematical precision of shell construction and the sophisticated materials science involved in creating these biological composites demonstrate evolution's remarkable problem-solving abilities. As the Cambrian innovations mature and stabilize, you begin to observe how these remarkable creatures transform from individual participants in the ancient seas into active architects of their environment. The predators and their prey have evolved beyond simple hunter and hunted relationships to become ecosystem engineers that actively shape and modify their world in ways that benefit entire communities of organisms. The burrowing activities of these ancient creatures create complex, three-dimensional habitats within the seafloor sediments. These burrow systems provide shelter not only for their creators, but for countless other organisms that benefit from the modified chemical and physical conditions within these underground networks. The circulation of water through burrow systems enhances nutrient cycling and creates microenvironments with unique chemical signatures. The feeding activities of large populations of grazers and filter feeders begin to have landscape-scale effects on marine ecosystems. The constant processing of sediments and organic matter by these organisms creates new patterns of nutrient distribution and sediment structure that influence the growth and distribution of bacterial communities and other primary producers. The construction activities of social groups create some of the first large-scale biological structures in Earth's history. These early reefs and mound systems provide complex, three-dimensional habitat that supports diverse communities of organisms while also influencing local water circulation patterns and sediment deposition processes. As your journey through these ancient waters draws to a gentle close, you begin to understand that the story you have witnessed is not simply a tale of the distant past, but rather the foundation story of all life on Earth. The innovations and relationships that emerged during these early periods of predator-prey interaction continue to shape ecosystems and influence evolution even today. Every modern ecosystem bears the imprint of these ancient innovations. The eyes that allow birds to hunt and navigate descended from the compound eyes that first evolved in these ancient seas. The schooling behaviors of modern fish follow patterns first established by the earliest social marine organisms. The chemical communication systems that coordinate everything from ant colonies to human societies trace their origins to the molecular signaling networks that first emerged in these primordial waters. The predator-prey relationships that you have observed evolving over hundreds of millions of years establish the fundamental principles that govern all ecological interactions. The arms races between hunters and hunted created the diversity of forms and behaviors that characterize modern life, while the cooperative strategies that emerged in response to predation pressure became the foundation for all social behavior and collective intelligence. The ancient seas that have carried you through this remarkable journey continue to pulse with life today, supporting ecosystems that are direct descendants of the communities you have observed. The deep ocean environments that served as refuges during past extinction events continue to harbor organisms that represent living links to the earliest periods of complex life on Earth. As you float here in these timeless waters, feeling the gentle rhythm of currents that have flowed for billions of years, you can sense the continuity that connects all life across vast spans of time. The warm embrace of these ancient seas speaks of patience, creativity, and the endless capacity of life to find beautiful solutions to the challenges of existence. Let yourself be carried deeper into these peaceful waters, feeling the weight of evolutionary history in every gentle current, every chemical gradient, every pattern of light and shadow. The predators and prey that shaped our world did so not through violence and destruction, but through a patient dance of adaptation and innovation that created the magnificent complexity and beauty of life as we know it. Rest now in the knowledge that you are part of this ancient story, that the same creative forces that shaped these early organisms continue to flow through every living thing, including yourself. The gentle waters that surround you carry within them the memory of billions of years of successful adaptation, cooperation, and the endless creativity of life, discovering new ways to thrive in an ever-changing world. Sleep peacefully, knowing that the legacy of these ancient innovators lives on in every breath you take, every heartbeat, every moment of consciousness. The forgotten prehistoric war was won not through conquest, but through the patient work of life learning to create beauty, complexity, and cooperation in response to every challenge the universe could present.